Disha has also shared some housekeeping rules on chat, so make sure to read them so that you can engage fully with the session. Welcome, Juanita. Welcome, Mohammed. Welcome, Eva. Welcome, Confiance, Sarah, Renette, Stacy. So excited to have you all here. Hi, Kavita, James. All right, keep those introductions coming in and we will get started. So today is the first session of 5 that we are conducting in the Systems Change Learning Series. And it's on the topic of 6 conditions for systems change. It's a very foundational topic that should help us dive more deeply into the upcoming conversations that are happening through the next 2 months. Can you put people on mute, please? Thank you. Great. I wanted to start by welcoming our guides for today. We have John and Juanita from the Collective Change Lab who are going to lead us through the session today. Practitioner, researcher, writer, teacher, and speaker, John wears many hats, but the focus of his work has been on how organizations and individuals can achieve change together. He's interested in the role of effective leadership in complex social change. Juanita has spent 2 decades supporting funders and social sector organizations refocus strategy and implement change efforts. Currently, her work is rooted in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion principles and practices. John and Juanita are going to be supported by 2 amazing social entrepreneurs, systems innovators, and co-founders, Andrea from the Soydoy Foundation in Colombia, and Odunayo from the Bramble Network in Nigeria. Thank you so much for co-creating this space. Andrea's work aims to enhance nutritional security by empowering women and youth to adapt and promote healthy and sustainable food practices. And Odunayo's work offers learning spaces in rural and marginalized communities, working with and for children, youth, and communities in Nigeria and many other parts of the world. With that, I'm going to hand it over to John and Juanita to introduce us to the framework of collective change. John and Juanita, over to you.
Great. So thank you so much. Thank you to Catalyst for inviting us to be part of this session, and to everyone logging in from everywhere in the world. I just love. It was a holiday yesterday here in the US where I am. And what a blessing to start your week and seeing people from Thailand, India, South Africa. I'm like, this is for me why I do what I do. And so yes, John and then thank you to also the 2 women that we're going to be in community today. And I look forward to have dialogue and exchanges with you. John and I are going to be presenting a few slides around systems change. I think someone put on the chat box, like looking to hear some fresh perspective on an aging buzzword. So hopefully you will be able to get that sense of refresh and anew today. So I'll go through some of our thoughts around how we envision systems change, and then I'll turn it over to John to talk a little bit about certain aspects of systems change that keep on coming as questions to us every time that we do this presentation. I want to start to really think about when we think about systemic oppression, it's often hard to truly, at least for me, it was always hard to understand. Like, I knew oppression was there, systemic oppression was there, but it was hard to understand why was it happening, and the complexity of it. And this particular phrase by a feminist writer, Marlene Fry, for me really helped catalyze what systemic oppression is. And So I'd love for you to go into this moment of introspection and think about, well, read with me this sentence, and think about you have a bird cage, and you have this bird cage in front of you, and if you look very closely to every single wire on the cage, you cannot see the other wires, right? Like if you focus on the cage and you see one wire, all you're seeing is that wire. Next. But it's only when you step back and you stop looking at those wires one by one, microscopically, and take a macroscopic view of the whole cage, that you see that the bird does not go anywhere. Then in this moment, you see that the bird is surrounded by a network of systematically interrelated barriers, none of which will be at least hindrance to its flight, but which in relationship to each other, as confining as the solid walls of a dungeon. For me, this is really what systemic oppression is. We're often focusing in our very specialized work, we often focus on that one particular barrier. But it's only when we take a look at those interconnected barriers, we truly understand why folks are not coming out of being homeless, or why we're having such a big problem with opioid use and with opioid addiction. Please, next. So really, when I think about systems change, one of the best definitions that I've heard from systems change come from Social Innovation in Canada, and it talks about systems change are the conditions that hold that problem in place. So those barriers in that bird cage that are making the bird cage stay solid, that are not allowing the door to open, that is what is systems change. We use this word in a very, it's one of those buzzwords, I agree, that everybody sometimes uses to describe complexity or interrelatedness of problems, but not very often we really understand, or we really think about what truly constitutes systems change. My colleague, John Kenya, and a few of his colleagues came up with this particular framework that really helps, at least has helped me a lot to understand what systems change is. And it's called the 6 conditions of systems change. And really helps us think about systems in 3 different levels: a structural level that we often are more focused on, a relational or semi-explicit level, and then a deeper transformational implicit level. Next. Most of our efforts when we're thinking about systems change tend to focus on the first part of the triangle, the top part. That's what we're used to. We're used to also because of a tradition of a kind of Eurocentric rationalization of problems. We tend to think about what we need to do in order to affect systems changes, focusing on policies, practices, or resource flows. So for instance, I'm going to give an example in education. It would say, okay, we're really going to change it. I worked in education a lot. And to really change education, we need to change the policy, for example, around school discipline, or we need to think about the policies of graduation requirements. And if we change that, we're really going to transform education. Or no, truly what we need to focus on is a better curriculum. We need a curriculum that focuses more on STEM because the world is changing. So those practices of the education system need to focus more on that new way of the world. Or resource flows, right? Like the monies should go more to schools versus to districts, or money should be more around teacher education, or what is the per pupil expenditure that we must have in order to have good education. All of those are truly important, and they affect how education happens, or like how it's implemented. But we keep on often spinning our wheels and making changes at that level over and over and over and again, and wondering, well, if we have these best practices, or why are we still so stuck? Why are we, for example, in the United States, the gap between Black and brown youth versus white youth is still so wide? And it's only by looking deeper that we start to realize that the system is also made by other not so tangible aspects. There are this second part, next, which are what we call, next, one more time, what we really call ourselves the cultural conditions of systems. And they are made up by the relationships and connections, power dynamics, and mental models. So for instance, going back, continuing with this theme of education, a very important researcher here in the United States who's actually very pragmatic, he does a lot of what we were calling continuous improvement, started to do research in schools, trying to figure out why certain classes and classrooms were doing much better than others. And yes, curriculum is important, the quality of the teaching was important, but he realized that one particular aspect really influenced student achievement, which was the relationship between students and teachers. He called that actually relational influence. His name is Tony Brike, and he worked in the University of Chicago. And he realized that the tightness and the intimacy that occurred between teachers and students was directly correlating to how they were performing in schools. So relationships and connections matter. We're going to be coming with a study that is going to be published in Stanford Social Integration Review, where we're examining actually a school in California that is focused, an organization in California that is focusing on transforming the relationships in school in order to truly transform education. Transforming relationships actually has another very important aspect, which is changing power dynamics. Who makes the decisions, who sets agenda, who is ultimately implementing change, who is evaluating change matters for a system. That power, how power is structured, changes the way systems can shift. And as we know, in many places, those power dynamics are very rigid, and they tend to be very vertical and usually tend to favor only one certain of the part of the population, not necessarily the part of the population who is closest to the problem. So changing power dynamics matters. Power dynamics changes very often because relationships and connections between different stakeholders also change, and they get transformed. Now, the true core of changing systems, and John is going to go a little bit deeper on, is mental models. Ultimately, or mind frames, the way that you think about the way that you are able to stay in relationship, change power dynamics, or what decisions you make on policies, practices, and resource flows depends on what your structural understanding of the world, what are your mental models about each other and the culture that you're in. Let's move forward. I'm just going to move forward, please. I'm just going to do very quickly, say some examples of systems change efforts that focus on the first part of the triangle. One of them is, for example, all the healthcare reform in the United States. I could say maybe that even the peace process in Colombia was a structural change. It was a decision that made a huge change in policy that made a huge change nationwide in terms of who gets covered for healthcare and who doesn't get covered. And it changed the system. However, it had backlash because the system didn't change. The mental models of our country didn't change. So as soon as that decision occurred and healthcare was available to all, a lot of resistance and decision started to crumble because we hadn't worked deep into changing the mental models of our country. The other way happens in terms of social movements, the movement around marriage equality. They worked really hard into changing the way we think about who has the right to be married, not so much about rights, but more about centering on love is love, and getting to understand the connection between people versus a cultural or religious frame in which those were happening. And now that particular marriage equality is quite solid even in this country where things are shaking a little bit. So I'm going to give John some more time. You can skip the next slide. I just want to basically mention you need to really think about all these different levels of systems change are interrelated. They don't occur on their own. That we need to think about them in connection but really know that the way to transform systems really works more in the bottom of the system, in those relationship power management models. And the realization that this is too much work for us to do alone is only, systems can only work, change can only work through a collective approach. John, to you to go a little bit deeper on
Thank you,
that.
Anita. Yeah, so I'm going to talk in much too brief a time about how do we think about shifting systems through more cultural change, the second and third levels. One of the questions, so I'm going to talk about two dimensions of that. One of the questions, probably the most frequent question we get asked as we're out talking about this approach to systems change is, okay, I understand mental models are important. I get that. How do you actually shift mental models? It sounds like a monumental task, and it is. And the reality is, it doesn't happen quickly. And the reality is, there's no one mental model. There are many mental models at work, but you can, over time, begin to shift mental models. And I'm going to just talk about sort of three ways that I've seen that happen. They're not mutually exclusive, but perhaps they'll be of use to you. The first is to shift attention to a new cognitive frame. By cognitive frame, I mean, we all walk around with sort of these worldviews and sort of ways that facts come together. In the United States, there was this sort of worldview around capital punishment, putting quote unquote criminals to death, and that you should do that. That was sort of a predominant view many years ago. And people were able to shift that cognitive view from starting, the initial way people talked about capital punishment was it was morally wrong. And that just wasn't working, because people just said, well, it's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So people came back, and when DNA testing came around, they said, well, you now could find out that you actually made a mistake and somebody died as a result. And that actually was a different cognitive frame that actually worked and shifted to sort of outlawing the death penalty in a number of states. So that's cognitive. Next slide, please. And I just talked about that, capital punishment on the right. Next slide. So the second way that I think can, in some respects, be more powerful even than just focusing on what's in our head, is starting to focus on relationships. And an example I often give is there's an organization some of you may have heard of, Seeds of Peace in the Middle East, and they bring together Israeli and Palestinian youth. And those youth, when they leave their time together with each other, have a very different perspective of each other. So that's shifting through relationships. Third, next. The other way to think is about sort of helping people have a different experience. Juanita mentioned the experience in Colombia, and there's a movement in the country to try to help shift the prevailing culture from sort of retributive justice to restorative justice. And one of the conversations is, can you actually do that if people haven't had the experience of sitting, for example, in a restorative justice circle, which fundamentally changes people. So there's this notion that we often tend to think that because we have to think differently and then we do differently. But in fact, arguably, one of the most powerful ways to shift a mental model is to help people do something differently, and then they think differently. As I said before, these are not mutually exclusive, but I found them helpful, as I think, in the work that I've done around systems change. So I'm going to talk very briefly about something that is a much longer topic, but one of the things that we've been trying to do is draw from places like restorative justice, truth and reconciliation, sort of non-dominant frames, indigenous practices, to ask ourselves, are there ways that we can learn from all of these sort of cultures and practices and approaches that help us understand how it is that you actually can help both an individual and a group transform? And we've come up with a frame that's right here. And I'll just go through it very briefly. If you want to read more about this, we published an article in last year in 2022 in Stanford Social Innovation Review, and it's called The Relational Work of Systems Change. But here we're identifying 5 really qualities of transformation that we've seen in these cultures that actually do focus and spend time on transformation. And I'll just walk through quickly. And I think you can click as I go. The first is sort of inner as well as outer change. Can you click the slide? Yeah. So somebody once said that the success of the intervention is based on the interior condition of the intervener. So as we think about as individuals and as organizations, doing that inner work is so critical. Second area, deep relational work. Well, yeah, we need to be in relationship. People, I think most people accept that. But how do we actually get to a deeper level where we're actually helping with what others have termed a relational field? And that may sound wonky, but let me give you the example using education of walk into one classroom and the students are working happily and helping each other, and the teacher's walking around providing guidance. Walk into a classroom next door and all hell is breaking loose. Those are two different relational fields. And that, as in a classroom, as we think about systems, that's critical. Yes, next slide. So this cultivating a space for healing, I think, in our experience, this trauma is about as close as we can get to root cause, in situations where there's oppression, that we need to sort of put trauma more front and center as not something that's tangential to the issue, but really, intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, collective trauma, and individual trauma, needs to sort of, be given a place to be nurtured, and for healing to take place. And we're doing work not only at an individual level with trauma and healing, but also at a systems level. If people are traumatized, systems are traumatized. Again, much longer topic. Next slide. Transforming power dynamics. How do you do that? One of the things that we've seen is that power doesn't sort of shift unless values shift. Values don't shift unless people are in relationship differently. Very similar to what I was talking about last time. That's sort of a way to think about shifting power dynamics. Serendipity and the sacred is the last. And I think in the modern world, the sacred and the spiritual are most often separated from the secular and the work of social change. We think that needs to sort of evolve and change, and that bringing in the sacred, helping people sort of connect to the fact that there's something greater, connect to the fact that, just situations of awe, bringing ritual into the work. Again, a longer topic. We're not talking about religion, but we are talking about the human quality of the sacred and the spirit, and how that can enter into this work. So all of these qualities, they may sound like to some of you, completely obvious, and to others, like, whoa, how would we ever do that? But if we're really going to transform our systems, we're going to transform and shift that culture that Juanita talked about earlier, our sense is this is the key avenues and ways to do that. So thank you all. I think we're going to turn it over to our colleagues who are doing the work.
Thank you. Hello, good morning from Colombia. I'm Andrea Escobar, and I greet you all from this beautiful country. First, I want to thank Catalyst 2030 for this invitation to share our experience and give us the opportunity to share this session with you, with all of you, and the company of my amazing colleagues today. I'm a social entrepreneur that enjoys learning new ideas and using that knowledge to solve social problems. 16 years ago, I co-founded Soydoy. I'm still leading that amazing company based on World Food Program here in Colombia. In February this year, in Colombia, 8 out of 10 people suffer from food insecurity. That represents a huge number of people, and unfortunately, our political, economic, and social situation doesn't give us signals of improvement, what translates in an increased number of people, children, young and adults, suffering malnutrition. Nutrition is the key to development, and that is why our purpose is to end malnutrition through improvements along the food system, turning them into healthy, equitable, sustainable, and accessible system for all. As food system cover a lot, we decided to focus into a specific part of them. First, food consumption, and second, economic access to food, the food that each of one of us need to live a healthy life. We began with a model designed to increase a family income, and with that, increase the economic access to food, always thinking of changing the system and making a sustainable impact. We bet on the economic development of the people. So by embracing their own skills, knowledge, and attitudes, they could break the poverty cycle. And then with higher incomes, they could get out of food security. At the same time, Soydoy teaches them healthier habits and nutritional tips. So they can not only have more food, but also use it in a better way to ensure nutrition. Soydoy has been implementing this model in 12 states of the 36 that we have in Colombia, replicated 67 times, impacting the life of more than 32,000 people. We must admit that we learned and we got to accomplish very important changes, but we face the challenge of not seeing good engagement levels in the communities. They have asked us for help, knowing that they need to change something in they increase their food security, but they lost their motivation a few months later, and only between 45 to 50% of them remain in the program. We needed to find the reason behind their leaving, so we decided to dig more intentionally to reframe the problem and better understand all the relationships, the rules, and the power dynamics of there. Sometimes we found something that was there all the time, but we couldn't see it directly. We found the importance of self-esteem and self-confidence, and now our vision, our own lives in short terms were affecting decisions and motivation. So we are asking, maybe you're asking why this is a remarkable finding. Well, we realized that nutrition is an investment. It's like our financial investment. You eat properly today to have healthy life tomorrow, not today. You don't eat something that you should not to prevent an illness tomorrow, not today. So if you are not living today, thinking about the opportunities that you are going to have tomorrow, dreaming about our future or your children's future, it's probably that you are not prioritizing nutrition and just eating not to feel hungry. And that changed your decision to attend workshops about nutrition information, to invest time, to invest part of the incomes that you are going to increase through your new business in food or better food for you and your family. And we found that not having a positive and inspiring vision of our own lives drive us to think in survival, not overcome our situations and be the change in our families and communities. What we learn is the clue to make a system sustainable, work first in self-esteem and strengthen the social fabric, to make people feel that they belong to something bigger, that they can have a future and make it happen. In other terms, that they deserve a better future, that we can teach them anything. Nutri-empowerment is the name of our model today. And we increase the rates of engagement in our programs from 50 to 65 up to 70, even though the most important result for us are to see them enjoying the learning, teaching others what they learn, making everything they can to increase the nutritional level of their own meals, and definitely to be more conscious of their health. They want to improve every day in all these aspects. And now they are the food change makers, the heroes that are going to change the food system in their communities by replicating that and what they learn, beginning with a sustainable social fabric through strengthening their self-confidence.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Andrea. Good evening from Nigeria. My name is Odanyo Aliu, and I'm here to represent Bramble Network. So what do we do in Bramble Network? Our work basically is around achieving educational equity for the most marginalized people. So currently in Nigeria today, we have over 20 million children that are out of school. And that's just one side of the problem. The other side of the problem is that even those children, young people who are in school, according to a report by World Bank, just a few of them are really learning. So in 2018, there was a report that out of all the children that managed to complete basic education in Nigeria, just about 10% of them can read, write, or do simple arithmetics. So that's a huge problem for us, especially looking at how our population is increasing, and the population of young people that we have also is increasing, but the educational facility that we have to accommodate this number is stagnant. So this for us put the education system in Nigeria in a state of emergency. So this is a problem that we are working at in Bramble Network. And we started this journey in 2016. At the time, we thought that if we are able to help these children who are not going to school, if we are able to put them in school, then maybe we'll be able to solve the problem. That was what was common at the time. People giving educational incentive to poor people, and that was what we knew how to do. But by 2017, we realized that this was, we're just scratching the surface of the problem, and we discovered that even though we had mobilized educational resources for about 500 children, and we had some of them in traditional schools, we quickly discovered that they were not really transforming in the way that we wanted them to. And some of these young people were in school, but they were not learning. They could not do the things that we think are important for them to do at their current age. So by 2017, we started, rethinking our model. What can we do differently? We spoke to different people. Stakeholders, and recently, my team and we also had to do this stakeholder map and identify if we want to change education system in Nigeria, who are the people involved and what are they doing? So we came up with this map, and we also started focusing on communities. Then by 2019, we began to work with the communities to change education in their community. So looking at the waters of system change, next slide, please. Next slide, please. These are a few of the things that we've been able to do. So currently, one of our approach is changing shifting the educational practices, which is one of the things that Janita was talking about. We believe that if we are to transform education, then we need to rethink the content and the method by which education is being done, especially in marginalized communities. We need to begin to realize that education is not, the way traditional schools are designed currently is to focus on academics alone. We need to begin to see that, it's beyond academics. It's not either this or that. We could have anything that everybody wants to learn, operate an open learning system where there's skills, where there's entrepreneurship, where we are also honoring traditional craftsmanship in our learning systems. While we are also promoting life skills, and also giving young people access to future skills and changing their mindset. So we started working with communities to set up learning spaces within their communities where their young people can also learn. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
The slides are changing here. Can you see the slides change? We are currently on relational change.
Okay. Also, okay, I guess it's my network. So one of the things that we also prioritize is to help communities know that they have the power to change their situation. When we started working with grassroots communities, the usual thing is for communities to wait for government or wait for people from outside to come and maybe build schools for them, to come and solve their educational problem. But when we started engaging communities, we let them know that, okay, with the resources available in this community, what can we do? And very quickly, communities begin to see that they have the power to create change within their communities. And we also begin to involve community members in the educational process of their children.
Oduayo, we can't hear you. Hello?
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah.
My connection. So we started engaging community members and using the available resources in the community. An example is Arikonki Village. When we started working in Arikonki Village, the communities, we had meetings with the communities, and the communities say, oh, this is what we have. We have a space, we have these local resources, we have bamboos, we have this, we have that. Then we began to show them how these local resources can be powerful in providing education for their young people. And community leaders are also key stakeholders in the education process that we provide. We invite them also to facilitate sessions, because usually the mindset is that when it comes to education, community members feel that they are not educated, and they sort of feel powerless. But one of the changes that we are working on and we've been able to do is to make them see that no, local knowledge is also important. Education is not just about what is in the textbooks. It is not just about knowing numbers and being able to speak English and all of that. So we've been able to also involve community leaders. They come as educators, they come as facilitators to facilitate sessions for their young people. Another thing we've been able to do is change the relationship dynamics between educators and the young people. In Bramble, we call our educators catalysts, because they are not, currently we see teachers as the alpha and the omega in classrooms. And, there's this mindset around, you have to do what I ask you to do, before you talk, raise your hand and all of that. But we've been able to also shift dynamics, relationship, in the sense that both the catalysts, which are the educators, they see themselves as learners, with the student. We are all learning. We are learning because, for example, when we moved to Arikonki Village, the children literally were the ones teaching us how to, do some type of farming, and different things. So they are not empty bottles that we are filling up with knowledge. They also have something that they can give. Next slide, please.
Oduayo, given we are way over time, I'm going to have to stop you right now, and you can continue sharing this your conversation in the breakout room with the group. Yeah. So what we are going to do is we're going to go deeper, and John and Oduayo are going to be in one breakout room, and Juanita and Andrea are going to be in another breakout room, so that we can engage more deeply in that conversation with them. And it'll start with John and Juanita first having a Q&A with them, and then there'll be space for you all to participate in that conversation as well. Disha, are the breakout rooms ready?
Yes.
Great. All right, so we're just going to move everyone to the breakout room so that we can continue this conversation there. All right.
I think everyone will have to select the.
Io, talked about the progression she went through that I've seen with many social entrepreneurs. Is you start feeling like solving the problem is sort of delivery of direct services, and those are always important. But you get to a point, often when you're really actually successful, of saying, okay, there's more going on. There are these conditions outside that we need to address. I can go from serving 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000, and there's still these conditions that need to shift. And so I think very successful entrepreneurs have gone through that natural evolution. Once you get into the system world, it is a different sort of set of capabilities and capacities. And that shift is often an interesting and important one for many organizations to make. And it doesn't, you don't necessarily have to make that shift from program to system. But I think for those that want to sort of really get at the root of the problem, they often will. The second thing, it came up in our, we talked a little bit about the end. Io talked about sort of how she was thinking about, quote unquote, measuring systems change. And what I heard from her was some really compelling qualitative stories about what she was seeing in terms of how youth were changing perceptions of themselves, and how adults were, becoming more sort of learning oriented and open. And that often is, in my experience, one of the most successful ways or important ways to assess systems change is through the qualitative work. And so I think we as a sector need to become more important with that. That needs to become more important, and we need to focus on these stories as giving us the why and the how, not just the what. The last thing I'll say is we often talk about transformation, and you heard me talk about that. And what I think is important to recognize is that transformation is a process and not a destination. And systems change is a process and not a destination. So we need to get in there and be a part of understanding the process, and not just sort of say, okay, if we implement this program, in 3 years, we should be able to tell them whether or not we're successful. Systems are always changing. These conditions are always changing. Their relationship to each other is always changing. So that's the hard work. It's not easy work, but if you sign up for systems change, that's important it's important to do. So Juanita, over to you.
Thank you, John. So we also had a really wonderful conversation, and a lot of our time was around mental models, and how necessary is to go there, like change needs to happen at that level, and also how difficult it is to go there. And we discussed how difficult it is to go there in many ways. So first of all, there's a question of time. Making sometimes programmatic changes, you can do, there's a before and after. In mental change models, there's not such thing, right? There's like it better and better every day, and then sometimes it goes back and you have to continue working. And that is difficult to do that work, because sometimes folks arrive to the work of changing mental models. For instance, in our conversation, Andrea's organization used circle work to change mental models. Participants sometimes arrive to her organization saying, I want something, right? Like an object, something that to help them with their immediate need, especially when the need is hunger, right? And the idea of being in community and taking the time to be in community and to learn to know each other, which is necessary to change mental models, is a hard ask. And yet that hard ask, what I heard from Andrea is that hard ask, it really reaps a lot of benefits, because folks then stay in community and want to stay together because they're not only arriving now for food security, but to be with each other and to change the way they think about themselves and to have a sense of belonging with others. So it's hard to start, it takes time, and yet the benefits are truly deeper and more long-lasting. The other conversation we had around mental models that was really interesting was around how we can say that we're changing the way we think, we can convince others about a new reality, and yet our behaviors don't necessarily correlate to that. So, this work is both about thinking differently, but acting differently. And in that acting is what needs to be continuously reinforced. And the final point we talked about is that, especially in social work, when we're doing systems change, we're always doing systems change. We're always trying to change the system, right? And we're trying to get in connection with community and change those mental models, or change mental models of, private stakeholders or public stakeholders. And yet there's a work that needs to happen internally that we're not always have even the time or even the realization that we need to do. And is, what are our own mental models? What is our own biases and our own trauma are we bringing into the work? And what do we need to do to be in our own circles to change also the way that we're engaging in the work? So our conversation was, very deep and truly requires us to be thinking about systems change from a different time perspective and effort perspective. And that's not always easy to let go. And in other webinars, we've also heard is always not so easily to fund. So this is hard work. And yet, if you stick with it, it is exponentially in terms of the benefit. Andrea mentioned the first community that you do healing circles with, or circles with, it's exhausting and intensive. But the second one, you have the first community that will give you the street cred that this works. So it's worth starting it. I think we have a few more minutes. Andrea and Oya, do you want, Ayo, I'm sorry. Do you have anything that you would like to say to the rest of the community in this few minutes that we have left together?
I just want to thank you, all of you, because your questions also let me learn and think more about what we are doing. Thank you for the important information that you are sharing through the chat. And just a message that is, if you are in the middle, or you are working with a social enterprise, or you have a movement, or you have something, the change is from our organization through externally. So I invite you to work first inside your organization, to work with your team, and then to think about everything that is external to the organization.
So much for inviting us. And my last word as well would be that to allow for system change, we need to keep it flexible. We need to be flexible to change, because over time, we will keep evolving. As the system is changing, the organization will also keep evolving. So as a team, we need to make up our mind that we will keep an open mind and learn the system, keep learning the system and changing it. And I also think, I agree with Andrea that it is difficult. And for us, one of the difficulties is to always have that involvement of every stakeholder, which is important for the work that we do. So to gather everybody together at different points is a bit difficult. but we need to make up our mind that to see the sort of change that we want to do, these are the hard work that we have to do, and we'll keep doing them. Thank you.
Thank you, John, Juanita, Odunayo, and Andrea. So grateful for your vulnerable sharing and perspectives, and to all of you for the many questions that you've asked to help us all learn. We'd like to quickly take feedback from you all. So Shonan is going to launch a poll that will be visible on the screen, and just take a minute to respond to it. We'd really appreciate your feedback. And as you're responding to the poll, I'd like to just share the two upcoming spaces. Both are very much linked to some of the conversation we've begun today. So the next space is on the inner work of systems change. And the one after that is on operating with ecosystemic awareness, where we actually get much deeper into the idea of like just transforming relationships that Juanita and John introduced us to, and then Andrea and Odunayo spoke so much about in their own organizational experiences. So we look forward to seeing you all there as well. And with that, I'd like to say thanks and have a good rest of the day, good evening, wherever you are. Really appreciate all of you being here with us.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Feel free to unmute yourselves and say bye in your own languages.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
We thought that we could do, I think we have like about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. We would love to hear from all of you and any questions you might have for Andrea or for me. Maybe we can start, Andrea, you and I, just being in a little bit of conversation. And so I love your work, and I think that what is incredible is that sometimes we focus on the biggest problems when we understand that it's truly through the most immediate ones that we need to affect the most change. And even for education, as you have mentioned it, when children go to school with the stomach empty, you just cannot focus on the learning. But I would love to just start asking you, I saw a lot of your work in your website. I know that you've done some circle work, which we've done, and we truly believe in it wholeheartedly. I would love to talk a little bit about your system. You know, you do some work in community, but if you were going to think about this as truly systemic and collaborative work, what type of stakeholders would you be truly interested, or have you already been involved with, and especially have you done any circle work with them? Because sometimes that type of work is not so easy to introduce for more traditional, and the more traditional corridors of power.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, our work is not what I show you earlier is the result of a process, a long process that we have been through these last, 3 years. We are working 16 years ago, so we have been learning a lot and changing everything that we do to get to the point that we right now that we are already working with people, with them, and with their vision of their lives. But also something that we began to do 2 years ago, more or less, is to have a collective impact network. That is what we call, and it's a network of different stakeholders that are around the geographic area where we are working, and not only there physically, but also that they have some role in the system. We are in food system, so every one of us here in this room, in this globally, in our planet, we have a role. We consume food. That is a role. And what we wanted to do is to learn collectively, how can we learn, how can we listen to them and really understand their problems, how and why and with whom we are working to solve those problems, but with the people that are suffering, and the people first, they are the first one, and we are just there to be able to accompany them, to help them what they need, not to solve anything, because we are not God, we are not the superheroes, they are the ones. So that is what we think, and we work with a lot of stakeholders around. They are there for sharing their experiences, their knowledge, maybe ideas, and they don't know anything about food systems, but right now they know that they are inside of the system. They realize that they are aware they are inside of the system, and they are part of the problem, and they can be part of the solution. So we are not working alone. We have a small team. We are 10 people in Soydoy, and yeah, that is what I can share right now.
Thank you. And I would love to hear a little bit more about, especially, again, this whole healing circle. There's an orientation whenever you do that type of work, right? When you're starting to do, focusing on that, or even in the experiential work that you do around what is the hardest thing to change? Where does the work need to focus, or where are most of your efforts focused on changing, if we're thinking about the triangle?
Mental models, because we are changing. What we realized was that what the mental model that the people have, we are what is blocking us, or is not letting us to eat well, to eat properly, to really matter what we eat. We say that we care. We say that we care. That is okay, but we don't believe. We don't behave as we say that we care. We eat anything that is not what we say that we are going to eat. So there is something there that we wanted to see, and right now we to see that, to be aware that what we are not thinking about our lives in future, that we believe in what we are going to accomplish, and this investment is we have and we should do it. And two things I have to share there. First one, the difficulty to change the mental models of us, the team, within Soydoy, because we are 10 women, we are 10 people, we are 10 women that are fighting every day to be coherent between what we say that we want to do and what we do. And we wanted, and we have to learn and change our behaviors to be aware and to be able to do it with anyone out there, not me. And also to change the mental models of and the mindset of our team, thinking about system change and design thinking and everything like that. But also the other one is the communities, because they are used to receive visits and trainings and workshops, and they want everything fast. They want things, they want objects, they want people that they are used to know or to think that that is the way that they are receiving something or they are changing something. And once we began with these circles just to talk, they were like, this is weird. Why? And when is going to happen anything here? Are we going to talk about food? And we are not. We are talking about us as people, as person, as women, as community. We are talking about our own problems. And then 2 or 3 visits after, they began to believe and they began to feel different and to feel part of something. And that was the magic happened there. But it was difficult at the first part because the first communities didn't believe that this is going to give us tools. So now for us it's easier because those communities talk with the other ones and they are open to receive the work. So but those 2 points for me, there are more, but these 2 points are the most important ones.
Thank you. I am writing. I have a couple of follow-up questions, but I would love to open it up to the audience to see if there's anyone who would like to ask either of us a question. Dale, Mary.
Thank you. No, I think it's wonderful, and thank you for sharing such a valuable experience. I was asking, like, how did you manage to, convince them to trust you enough time in order to have 2 or 3 or 4 visits until the magic happened, Andrea? Because maybe once, I don't know, they don't feel comfortable at the beginning and they would find it hard, coming back again and again and giving the project and giving the people time to do that. So maybe if you have a couple of suggestions or comments, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Of course. What they say, not what I think, what they say, that they were, okay, I am going to go again today to see what happened, is because they were feeling hearing, they were feeling care. They feel different, that we are there just to share from ourselves. And that was what they what keeps them there. And then what keeps them there was where that they feel part of something. They felt part of a system, a community, something. They were part of a community because we work with neighborhoods or rural areas that they live close, each one of there, but they didn't trust in each other, or they didn't work together, they didn't meet them before. So what keeps them continually going is that they feel loved, they feel presence, they feel that everyone is present there.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to ask one question and then go to you. One question and then go to you, Francesca. So the question is about if you have any guidelines for the circles when you start them. Like, what are the guidelines? And then Francesca.
Yes and no. We began with guidelines, but we learned that we also are able to just forget the guidelines and let the space flow, because the people that are around us is the one that they are leading the space, the energy and the topics and the feelings. And we we have been painting, sewing, making mandalas, or walking, doing yoga. We are not just sitting. We are using a lot of tools, but the conversation, even though that we have some questions or some structure, they are the ones that they change the subject and they leave the space with the energy. And that it was important also because they feel that they were listening. They are being there as important ones. You know, my opinion is here, and they are listening my opinion, and they are doing what I suggest, and that is important for us also.
Thank you. Francesca. I hope I'm saying that right, your name. Francesca, you have your Monetti, you have your hand up. No? Francesca Monetti, you have your hand up. I'm not sure if you want a question.
I don't know if she's listening.
Finola, now I'm getting repeat. Oh, now it's trying to talk about you. We can't hear you.
There's an echo.
No, we can't hear you, Francesca. You can put your question on the chat box. We can't hear you. Sorry. I saw another comment, Finola. I don't know if you would like to talk a little bit about the work of mental model change, but yes. So please feel free to go on mute if you would like. But yeah, it is. We often get asked in the work of systems changes work that is really large and at scale. In the work of changing mental models, it's so deeply intimate. One of the questions we get often is, how do you scale that intimacy, right? How do you do this work at a large scale? And all that I have to say in relation to that is, we also have to change our own mental models about how long does change need to happen. You know, we often are even talking about intergenerational change. But it really, and we don't, at least at Collective Change Lab, we really don't think that things scale, right? But it's more that they spread, right? So Andrea, one of the examples that you gave is like, you start with one community, and that intense work of that the first community is really painstaking, but that gives you enough street cred that the work with the second community won't be as intense. And then I'm very close to a lot of work that is happening in Colombia around the peace process as well. And it tends to happen that way, like communities that have experienced those circles and experience, body healing, mind-body healing, start doing it on their own in their own communities, right? So, getting the work to spread, it occurs, it's often harder to get some actors that are so used to thinking in very straight terms how to engage in this type of work. So sometimes getting the private sector to join one of these healing circles is harder, right? Because their own mental models are so strict. So, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. So I did briefly appreciate, Andrea, you mentioning that this is all. One of the other things that I really appreciated was you mentioning that this is not only work that we need to do in the community or with the community or with stakeholders, but ourselves, like how much we realize that we're so part of the system and that we carry our own trauma and our deeply ingrained mental models. And that's hard for social change leaders because we are doing the work out of goodness and out of generosity, and we're usually like stretched out and trying to be incredibly selfless. So to have that moment of self-criticism and say, I need to do my own work is part of changing the system, and how we model how we do that work is incredibly valuable. I have found that, in my personal life, even when I arrive to corridors of power, how I show up, even in these meetings, truly sets the change of how the water is gonna start, changing. We have, let me just look at I don't know if Francesca, I don't know if is still with us. I think she left. I hope we get to connect with her after. Any other thoughts for folks?
Hi, Juanita, I'll
go for it.
Yeah, so Francesca, unfortunately, she logged out, and then when she came back in, she's in the main room, and I think we're almost done anyway. So she'll look forward to following up in the main room or after. I just wanted to share, as someone who comes from the education space, in the education background, a lot of this conversation is making me think of Paulo Freire and some of his work. And for those of you that are not familiar, I think it would be a great resource for people who are trying to think about ways of engaging that are deeply empowering, in which the teacher or the facilitator or the catalyst or whatever you want to call them is really being self-reflective. So I just wanted to share that in case, because I remember when I first discovered that literature, it was like, yes, that's it. And so just to share that here, and thanks for the conversation, really an important one.
Thank you, Anon. I hope I pronounced it right. And it's true, we're just some of that wisdom. Wisdom is ancient, right? So even Paul Freire's wisdom comes from his own traditions, right? Which are traditions from our ancestors. And this is the way that we used to behave, right? Like around the fireplace, like always being self-reflective, and how we need to continue behaving like that, not only in our private spaces, not only around the fireplace with our children, right? But also in this kind of metaphorical fireplaces that we're having today.
Yes, my network is a bit slow, so if I get disconnected, I might put off my video. I hope that's okay.
Great.
Okay.
You sound good now.
So, yeah. So I think we had to do the stakeholder actor map because we wanted to know where we stand. We wanted to understand what every other person in the system was doing. And one of the big learnings that came up while doing that is the fact that initially, we used to think that, the young person, the child, the core beneficiary, we were not able to see that they were a very active stakeholder. Initially, we thought, we were helping them, we were supporting them. But doing this exercise was, a way to make us see that they are actually a major key stakeholder. And if they are not actively involved, then we are not going to be able to do anything. And we were also able to see how does our organization, how do we want to work with these different stakeholders? Also, initially, we thought, funding is a struggle. And but doing this mapping was also able to help us see areas where resources can flow into this system, into the problem that we're solving. For example, the local communities they have, what can they do? And we realized that, the local communities can mobilize parental involvement. They can provide mentorship for the young people, and community leaders as well can be a voice and representation for the problems in the community. They can also be actively involved in advocacy. Initially, our organization was the one doing the advocacy on behalf of the community. Different civil society groups are doing advocacy, on behalf of the community. But doing this map, we realized that the community themselves could also be involved actively in advocating for the solution that they think is necessary for them. So that's one of the things I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And did you find when you did the mapping, were there certain organizations that you thought, you know, oh, we didn't? Did you feel like you were in relationship with a lot of the organizations, or were there some where you felt like, well, they're important and we're not necessarily in relationship with them, we need to sort of increase that?
Yes. I think one of the ones we discovered that they were important, but we did not have strong corporations, private sector. You know, we had, you know, ignored them for so long that, okay, you know, maybe we just approach them for CSRs when they have fundings to give. But we were also able to discover that, you know, beyond asking for funding, we could also involve private sectors in, you know, developing, providing mentorship, providing skill training for young people, you know, for workforce development. Also, we're able to get people that were willing to provide technology access for rural communities where we work. Then even government, initially, you know, we had a mindset. I think one of the major things this did for us is, you know, changing our mindset as an organization. Because we were also quite weary of, we've had some issues with, you know, the bureaucratic process of working with government. You know, it was rigid, it was hard to work with government. But doing this exercise as well made us see that, you know, there are some government institutions that were willing and open to getting involved with community work. For example, instead of going to ministries of education, we could work with local inspector of education departments in local government. You know, they were, you know, when we got to them, you know, they seems to be a, you know, a unit that had been ignored for so long. They don't have so many people coming to them. You know, a lot of people go to Ministry of Education, and they were very, very helpful for the work that we do in the grassroots communities.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. Sorry, Hannah.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think we often find that with government is that, you know, people assume you have to go to the top, but there's a set of people that are actually doing the work that are, you know, are sometimes ignored within government. I'm just going to, let's see, there was a question about, let's see, I'm intrigued at the finding that 70% of learners in school were not actually learning. What parts of the current education system, including sacred cows, needed to be let go of in order to make way for new approaches?
Okay. So I think the first thing is, you know, one of the main questions that we are discussing now is how can we really reimagine education? It's like we need to pull the whole system apart and, you know, begin to look at it one after the other. For example, in Nigeria, the current content of our education system needs to be reevaluated. You know, in terms of content, our content, the content of our curriculum are not really future. They are not necessarily preparing the young people for the future. You know, so all the young people we have in basic education today, or even secondary education, we're preparing them for workforce for the next 10 years. And our curriculum does not even reflect the changes that we have today. And we are too focused on routes, you know, route learning, memorization. We also need to really check how assessment is being done. I think that's, you know, that's a big thing that it seems like not, major so that determine, the regulation and structure for schools. And maybe I'm afraid to really dive into that. I can't. But assessment is something that we also need to pull apart. Currently in Nigeria, how it works is that you get examination, you see students memorize to pass. Then after the exam, it forgets everything. In fact, we discovered that there's a common thing that students say. They say la cram, la pour, la delete, which means you memorize, you write the exam, then you delete it after the exam. So there's no education is supposed to be transformative. Education is supposed to change who we, help us harness our potential and just change the way that we see things. But that is not currently happening with our education system. So we also need to look at that. And to achieve that, I mean, that's where the whole system change comes in. It's a whole lot of conversation that have to involve everybody in the system, that have to involve the government, civil society, even the young people themselves, the communities, the parents, and everybody. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really interesting. And I think you can take two lenses into that. One is sort of the structural or technical approach that, okay, we just have to, the rote learning doesn't work, or it's just not, consistent with learning. And yet you stepping back, there are the cultural dimensions that keep that there, right? The mental models, there's some mental models that are sort of driving that, who's in relationship with whom, and of course the power dynamics as well. And it was really interesting to hear you talk about how you've engaged the community in a way that, maybe is shifting power dynamics and is more about creating community agency. And when you were talking about that, you had such energy in your voice. It sounds like, that's been something that, you've actually seen results from.
Yes, and really, really interesting because initially when we got to Arikoki village, and I'm using Arikoki village as an example because that's one of the communities where our work is really strong. And they did not have school or any learning facility for as long as the community had existed. So they've been waiting for someone to come and help them. So when we got there, I mean, we did not come like a superhero because we told them, what did you have in the community? We had to have meetings, and the community had one religious center where learning could actually happen. And that was the first classroom that the community started using. And they had a lot of, bamboo structures, trees and all of that. And that was the outdoor learning centers. So the first thing, the change in mindset to help them see that you are actually not helpless. You are actually, you have resources that you can harness, and that started the process. So even when we were ready to start building proper structures for learning, the communities, they started bringing resources. So we did a plastic bottle structure. They had a lot of plastic bottles that, that were not useful. They brought it. They were the one who filled it with sand. They were the bricklayers to construct, the buildings and all of that. So now that gave them a sense of ownership that we own this facility. It's actually a community-based facility. It is our own. And anytime we are designing, a new program or something, there must be community represented, community leaders or someone, to say, oh, this is how we should design this. This is how we should frame this. So communities are actually very involved in the way we design our education system. And we have been able to do this in other communities as well, to make communities know that you have something, you have the little resources that you think you have, you can actually use it to create your own educational solution instead of waiting for someone outside, waiting for government interventions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I think we've got maybe 3 minutes. I'm going to give you probably this one last question. There's interest in how you measure impact, success, what have you. And I'll ask you to comment on that, both at sort of more what we would typically consider the program level, which is the working directly with children, and also is there any attempt to measure sort of system level impact, changes in the system, shifts in the conditions that are holding the problem in place.
Okay, in terms of system, I would say the transformation that we are seeing in the children, the mindset shift. So one of the things that we struggled with initially was young people many of them don't have the motivation to learn. So yes, we're providing education solutions, but if the young person themselves are not motivated to learn, there's literally nothing you can do. But we've seen that change in the communities where we work, and children that used to run away from any educational program that you put them in, now they are the one. We literally have to be the one to send them home that, oh, we are done for today, go home. We've seen the young people transform in that they are beginning to see themselves as change agents. And, there's this mindset again around education that we're preparing you to get a job. But for us, it's about you becoming, we tell, and if you ask any young person in Bramble that, oh, the question we say is, what problem do you want to solve? What problem do you want to solve? They've seen themselves, as a powerful agent in their community to solve problems. So that's, for us, is a huge, how do I say, it's a huge transformation. And many of the participants in our programs, you see them carrying out community projects, even without you telling them. Recently, we had an erosion issue, that has been affecting the front of the learning center in Arikonki village for a while. And, without anybody necessarily suggesting it, the young people, organized themselves to fix the road. So those are the sort of, subtle changes that, because it makes us confident that by the time these people leave this place, it's not just for them saying they're going to look for a job. There's this transformation that has happened in them. And also, we are very big on value. So we have a practice that we call family meeting. Every day we have, like a circle where we talk about values. So this week we could be talking about integrity. Next week we could be talking about another, kindness and things like that. So one transformation we have also observed is when many of these young people come. We had a case of, for example, Rashidat. Rashidat was fire. She was very, according to her parents, she was very, she cusses a lot. She abuses people. She was not very kind, and this was not her fault. This was because of the environment where she grew up in, and that is similar for many of these young people. But coming, and the way we have designed the learning center, you could see them begin to transform after a few months. You could see them begin to show kindness to one another. You could see them begin to exhibit, very integrity and different kind of values that are important to us as humans, So these are beyond, the learning outcome. These are beyond measuring the academic performance. These for us are very, very important things that we look out for.
That's a wonderful answer. That's a wonderful answer. We've got 59 seconds up. I'll just make a comment. I may make it in the big session. People are always wondering how you measure systems change. And the reality is indicators don't do it. It's by and large, it's going to be qualitative information and often stories. And you've just told some beautiful stories. And in fact, the stories give you not only the what, but the why and the how. And that's much more important, and that's much more interesting, when you're trying to do systems change work. So that's sort of an evolution that, the sector needs to go through, is to become more comfortable with, the qualitative sort of information that you shared, which, in my opinion, tells me a lot about what's going on and the success that you're having. So thank you for sharing all that.
Thank you.